good leaders think about strategy and great leaders think about psychology. That was something that was so interesting to me in playing board games with Mr. Beast.
I think quick feedback loops are imperative when creating content. Go to the audience and ask them, what do you want to hear about around this topic? But most importantly, what do you want to hear around this topic that you haven't heard before?
I need to understand that sleeping more is not wasting time. It's actually making me more effective the next day, for example.
Sleep is a huge deal, by the way. And you know what's interesting about great historical figures is they all lie about their sleep.
So you're basically wearing headphones 24 hours a day.
No, the AirPods stay in, baby.
Yeah.
Focus is not saying no to bad opportunities. Real focus is saying no to good opportunities, even to like borderline great opportunities that aren't the thing that you need to be focusing on right now. Everyone who knows the business of podcasting tells you that you need a newsletter. And the reason is,
we've got some
Hey,
fresh new
I'm
young
Luis.
talent
And
doing some
I'm
things that I know
Luis.
you haven't
And you're
heard
listening to the
before.
Content is Profit podcast.
Guys, welcome back. I'm excited for today. Somebody that we had about 250 episodes ago. That came out of my mouth easy, but man, 250
Been
episodes.
a journey.
Been a journey.
It's been a journey for us here in the pod. You know, we got different scenario.
Yeah.
It's been a journey for guests as well. His life, I feel like, has changed a lot, or at least the perspective from social media.
Content's
seems like,
still great. Content's still awesome.
I know, absolutely
So,
amazing. Not gonna lie, that was one of my favorite episodes we've recorded. Like, I remember I was like fangirling so hard. I was like, this is so cool.
Fangirl.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was epic.
Not fanboying.
Fanboy and fangirling, all of it, man. It was such a cool episode. I was listening to it today, and I was like, wow, so many golden boulders shared.
Yeah. All
Yeah.
right.
So
We're
let's-
good?
Yeah. Let's do it. Let's bring him on.
Let's bring him on. Hold on. No intro?
Yeah.
Bro, come on.
I told you, we're keeping it casual today. The intro was that we brought him to 50 episodes
Sounds
ago.
good. Sounds good. Well, with that said, guys, please welcome the one and only Ben Wilson.
Ben, welcome.
what's up, guys? Woo! It's great
Hey,
to be
look.
back on.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's been amazing having you here. It's amazing having you again. I'm not gonna lie, but I listened to the intro that we did on the previous episode, and I said, "There's no way we're topping that." That intro was pretty epic. So you know what? I'm coming in from the bottom because that way we can only go off for the rest of the episode. So
Yeah.
Great.
Did,
Can't wait. You
yeah.
guys have like 200% more facial hair than the last time I was here.
But thank you. That has been, I haven't shaved since last time you came here either. So that's, 2 years of trying to grow something.
yeah, you didn't see it, but when we finished the call, he was like, "I ain't shaving until Ben comes back into the pod." So,
Dude, Ben, I'm extremely stoked about, I mean, you have been really, since that day that we actually met, you have been really an inspiration, not only on the creation side, but how you do your show is like such a high bar in a sense of like production level, the research, like the thing. And, for those who don't know who Ben is, I highly recommend go back to episode 245. Just type Content is Profit, Ben Wilson. We're going to link it right below. And it's really a mastermind on production, on research, on what he's done, obviously his backstory. But, since we talked about, I think, in the last 2 years, there's been a little bit of a different thing I think you also have a different set when you came on. So do you want to give us an update a little bit on your side, what has been like the last couple of years?
Yeah, I live on the other side of the country, so I'm in a different room from the last time we talked. Last time I was on the East Coast, now I'm out west in Utah.
Nice.
So, obviously My First Million, I was the producer there. I think last time we talked, I had just started or...
you guys were, you guys were on the way producing the show. I think 2 million downloads a month, and you were a big part of that. Yeah.
And so that was a great experience. I stepped away from My First Million like 3 months ago, something like that. Thankfully, My First Million or How to Take Over the World has just been doing well. And so a show like My First Million just has a way of drawing you in and taking all your time and attention, right? So I decided that it was time to focus on my own stuff. And so now I'm doing How to Take Over the World full time.
That's awesome. I go and walk at night with like my dog, or like right now I'm doing like this 75 hard challenge. So my second workout is a weighted vest thing with like 30 pounds on it, walking the dog, you know, pretending I'm working.
Yeah.
I'm like the alpha dad of the block. I was like, what's that?
They're looking at your weighted vest like, is that bulletproof? What is that?
It actually, the plate that you put in, it says like, not bulletproof, do not shoot. It's like a big sticker warning that goes in there, which is, you know, insane. But and I've been listening to your episodes, man. The Genghis Khan, amazing series, right? And that was the one I was listening last night. And I go back, I made this comment on the first episode that we interviewed, right? Like I was falling asleep in my history classes, but you have this way of telling a story that is very engaging, and also you connected to today, to entrepreneurs and different things, right? And obviously that's a very unique way of creating the content. So I'm so happy that your show is doing amazing, and there is a no-brainer. But also, I know that you released like a membership and a newsletter. You have all these things that you didn't have back then, right? So can you walk us a little bit of like the decision maker on those things and like how it came to be? Because a lot of content creators that tune in for our show, they either have a business and they're trying to connect their content with their business, or they start creating, and then after the creation process, you know, kind of takes off a little bit, they're trying to, you know, make that connection that you're doing right now. So I think a little behind the scenes on that, I think it'll be super awesome.
Yeah. So the newsletter is essentially just everyone who knows the business of podcasting tells you that you need a newsletter. And the reason is you have no direct connection to your listeners. You don't know who they are.
Yeah.
Spotify, Apple Podcasts, they're all great. They're great services. I'm not like a political guy. I don't anticipate getting canceled anytime in the near future. But the bottom line is Spotify, for whatever reason, could decide they don't like me. And I love Spotify. I have a great relationship, and they've actually been awesome to work with. But if they decided that they wanted to take my show off of Spotify for whatever reason, that's 60% of my audience out the door. And there's nothing I can do about it. So everyone says you need to own the customer relationship, so get those emails. So that's the reason to start a newsletter. Right now, it's something I'm doing that's pretty minimal, just to get something out there, just so I can establish that direct tie. The subscriber thing is interesting. I just launched it, and I wish I'd launched it a long time ago now. The money is, at this point, I'm making a small fraction of what I make from advertising.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's true for most people that do a subscription service in podcasting. It's hard to make as much money as you do with ads. But the thing that I love about it actually is I think you need to match your business model to your attention span, if that makes sense. So advertising is you sell these big deals once every few months, and you don't see necessarily the direct connection between the advertiser and your content as much. Whereas with this, I can just see, I put out like a really great EndNotes episode where I cut off after 10 minutes, and I see the subscribers go up and I see the revenue come in. And so the business model really matches my attention span. And so, because I have a short attention span, right? I like things to be like this. I like things to go now. And so for me, it's just made the process even more enjoyable than it was. And it's already a passion project, but to have that like immediate response, I love it. And it gives me, again, a more direct connection to my subscribers who have more ways to offer feedback, more opportunities to engage, creates a little bit more of a community. So all that like immediate feedback, I think it's like, you talk about YouTubing, and people put up their YouTubes and immediately they get comments, they get feedback. That's one of the things. My first million only got a fraction of the views on YouTube that they got on podcasting. But Sam and Sean always really emphasized YouTubing because they loved the comments, they loved the feedback. And so that's another thing that I love about the subscriber model is there's more avenues for feedback. So it's only a couple days in, and I love it. I recommend everyone do it. Even if it's not a big part of your business model, it's worth it for the relationship it drives with your listeners.
I think quick feedback loops are imperative, right? When creating content, because it'll just, going back to our previous conversation, right? We asked you kind of like, what was the secret sauce to creating some good content that people wanted to consume? And your answer was, well, go to the audience and ask them, hey, what do you want to hear about around this topic? And then you said, but most importantly, what do you want to hear around this topic that you haven't heard before? And you shared this story about a podcast on demand gen, how everybody was like, well, there's already a lot of this podcast. They already shared everything, until one person told you, well, you probably wouldn't be able to ask this, but I would love to know how they spend their money. And then you were asking everybody else, oh, would you like to know about this? And everybody else like, yes, absolutely. That's amazing, right? Again, that is feedback loop. You were seeking that feedback. But now I think having different avenues where you can get that feedback even quicker, I think it's absolutely amazing. And I'm curious, is this subscription like the podcast subscription that people pay, or is this like a Patreon, a community? What is it exactly?
Yeah, it's through Supercast, actually, is the service that I'm doing it through, which is Patreon-like. The main difference is you don't have to listen on app for Supercast. You can sign up through Supercast and then listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you want to listen, which I really appreciate, because I'm like a hardcore podcast listener, right? So I have, I listen through, why can't I think of the app? Through Overcast. And I really like my setup, right? And I would hate to have to go to Patreon for another podcast. So I want to give my listeners that
it's like you have on your phone like this little folder, right, with like 5 different streamers of podcasts. Yeah, you have Apple Podcasts, Spotify.
So it's like a private feed.
Snipod or whatever.
It's actually, So I've got, that's my folder right there. I've got Overcast. Overcast is what I use for the podcast that I know I'm going to listen to every episode. So when I go to my Overcast feed, it's like, this is the feed I will,
like your main feed. Yeah.
I've got Pocket Casts, which is another good podcast app, which I like a lot. That's the one I use for the podcast that I pick and choose, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes I listen to the episodes, sometimes I don't. So like a lot of sports podcasts that I don't listen to all the time.
Like the casual where, you're trying to disconnect from the world, and you're like, this is what I want to listen to. Yeah.
That's right. Then I got Audible, which is Audible. And I got Speechify, which is a great app for, I just don't have time to read all the articles I want to read. So Speechify will just read them to me, right? It's a text to audio service. And then Spotify for Spotify only podcasts.
Nice.
So you're basically wearing headphones 24 hours a day.
Those AirPods stay in, baby.
I'm curious to know what's in your rotation right now. What's your like top 5 that you constantly listen to?
Well, I always
besides content is profit, of course. We know that.
I got to tell you my content diet. I always listen to Fall of Civilizations when it comes out. It's an amazing podcast. Production quality is super high. I love it. They haven't released an episode since April, so that's not great.
Oh wow!
Come on, guys.
But
we need more.
When you like, if you're going to be that intermittent, it has to be super high quality. And when you listen to it, you understand like, oh, this is why it takes so long. He does stuff like, so this guy, Fall of Civilization, is about fallen civilizations, right? And why they fell and what we can learn from them. And this guy is like an honest to goodness Indiana Jones style archaeologist who is like out there in the deserts of Iraq, like with a brush uncovering pottery, right? The guy who hosts it. And so he will, for example, find music from the era and have people recreate it and try and recreate the instruments from the time. And some of these things have like dead languages that only have like 200 speakers of the language left. And he'll go find one of those people who actually speaks the language so that you can hear the quotes that he's quoting, both in English, I'll have them translated, and also how it would have sounded in the original language. So he like does all this stuff that really puts you in the world of what you're listening to. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's super great.
I've noticed that you started doing more of that on How to Take Over the World. You started putting more immersive effects, right? And I love that. Like one of our favorite podcasts is Business Wars. And I remember that was probably the very first podcast that I heard that had all these effects, right? That I felt like I was in a movie of a way. Right? And now I remember the last episode that I listened on How to Take Over the World. I was listening and I was like, oh man, like this is new. I was like, this sound effect, this is so awesome. I was like, I feel like I'm kind of like in the, in the scene with them, which is really, really cool.
Well, it started with the Da Vinci episode, and he was such a great artist, right? And he cared about doing everything perfectly and the best it could be. And he would take years on a painting if he had to. The Mona Lisa, he never finished. He kept it with him till the end of his life, just continually adding little touches. And I thought, there's no reason at this point not to make the podcast as good as it could be and sound as beautiful as it could sound. And so that's when I started to add it. And some of these things also, for example, Oppenheimer, doing that episode, one of the coolest things I learned in reading American Prometheus was that for about a minute and 20 seconds after that first nuclear test went off, they were so far away, because obviously you do not want to be close to a nuclear explosion. Tip for everyone out there listening: you don't want to be close if a nuclear bomb goes off. Everyone's so far away observing it that for a minute and 20 seconds they can see the explosion, but they can't hear anything. Wow. And then after a minute 20 seconds, that's when they hear the like big boom. Hang on just a second.
No worries.
That's pretty impressive. One of my first shows that I really experienced that was one called Planet Money. So when we were driving around working with Happy Feet and coaching all these soccer kids, we had to like drive 300 miles a week, right? I'm like, okay, I'm done with music. Why can't I start listening? And Planet Money is a podcast from NPR, so it's like super reporter style, but they go into their locations to do their research, and then they layer out. They do with like recorders, and then they do layer out the sounds of like, hey, I'm walking out of my car, and like you hear the car door, you kind of go, and then they put some music. And it was the first time, that was like probably my first or second podcast I ever listened to, and I remember thinking, wow, this is a great experience for the listener. But also when we started our show, that was my reference, and I was like, man, that like. It's hard. Like if you're new to this, if you're new to content creation, like where do you even start there, right? So for us, like I've always been a content consumer. I remember like growing up, I would be watching TV. I'm like, how cool would it be like work on something like this, right? And now it's awesome. It's a different vertical, different thing, and we do it. But Ben, do you think like, do you gotta be like an avid content consumer to produce something that ends up being a big success? Or because a lot of the people that we help, right, like we ask them, we're like, what's your reference, like what's the podcast that you listen to, what's a show that you watch? And most people are like so involved in like the day-to-day of their thing, of their business, of their life, that they might have one or half a reference, or sometimes I don't know, somebody told me I need a podcast, right? So
well, and you bring up, is it Planet Money that you said?
Yeah, Planet Money.
I really think that there's a lot of value. People want to do things differently, and they should, right? But there's a lot of value to going into, or at least learning from, the big leagues before you try and do things differently, right? So what you'll see a lot of times is people want to diverge too early. Like, for example, if you want to do something like truly different and interesting in finance, like go work for Goldman for a couple of years. I promise you, you're going to learn a lot. Even if you think things should be done differently, you should learn from the best. And NPR really is that in podcasting. I think that there's a lot, podcasting they used to be podcasting and like that type of radio, right? And now there's so much beyond NPR. But if you want like really high quality sound design, sound engineering, sound quality, like they just care so much about the way podcasts sound, and they do it so professionally and so well. And I think so many people skip straight to like Rogan and people who and Rogan has great sound quality too. He cares a lot about that stuff too. But anyways, I just think people skip past NPR because the content is, like, frankly, a little stale at this point. You can find people who, in terms of what they're actually doing in terms of content, is more interesting. But in terms of the delivery, people should study NPR more than they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I like what you mentioned, right? And which is kind of like what you've been doing with your podcast, right? Go study from the greats, like go learn from the people that are having success. That's what you're doing with How to Take Over the World, right? You're going and learning from these people and then implementing it. And I think it's pretty awesome how you did the Da Vinci episode. And while reading and studying about it, you're like, he's a perfectionist. He has this attention to detail. Let me do the same with this episode as well, and leveled up, right? And now all the episodes are leveled up. You have a new standard now, which is really, really cool. I've had a question from the beginning, which you said now all your attention is on how to take over the world. And I'm curious on how placing your focus on one thing has affected it, right? Like what has been that change from part-time, how to take over the world in a sense, to now putting your full attention and intention into growing this podcast. And the reason I'm asking is because when we focus on one thing, we probably have to take our focus away from other things, right? We, in a sense, have to sacrifice other things that we might want to do for the sake of this one thing that we want to accomplish. So I'm curious, right? Because again, in the business world, there's a lot of things that we can be doing. You know, we're the first one to raise our hands and our attention and capacity to spread out all across the table. But I think pinpointing the value of focus would be very valuable for those listening.
Yeah. So there's this great story of Warren Buffett and Bill Gates are hanging out. I want to say on a boat. I think they were on a boat for whatever reason. And Bill Gates' dad is there. And so he turns to the two of them. You get two of the wealthiest, most successful people on the planet. And he says, I want to know what you guys think is the key to your success. And so they do a little game where they each write down a word on a piece of paper and they turn it over at the same time. And they had both written down the word focus as the thing that had differentiated them and made them successful. Yeah. And there's that good Steve Jobs quote, which I was just Googling right now, which is okay, here we go. People think focus means saying yes to the thing you've got to focus on, but that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to the 100 other good ideas that there are. You have to pick carefully. I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. And I think that's really crucial. And of course, like focus is not saying no to bad opportunities. That's like the baseline. Of course, you're going to say no to bad opportunities. Real focus is saying no to good opportunities, even to like borderline great opportunities that aren't the thing that you need to be focusing on right now. And so for me, that has allowed me to level up my quality, of course. It's also hard to explain that there's something that happens. It's like, even if it's just 5 or 10 hours a week on something else, that's not that much time. It's really not a time issue. It's being able to wake up in the morning and just go, there's just one thing I got to get done today. Like there's one thing that I know is the thing. And there's something qualitatively that happens when that is true. That's not true when it's like, I'm really not spending that much time on this other thing. It's like, there's one other thing. And you have to wake up and you say, okay, what am I going to do today? It's just a different experience of, I did an interview with Mr. Beast the other day. And
that, by the way, that's the reason Ben didn't come into our original date. We're like, that's the only excuse acceptable.
That is true.
Yeah, we're like, hey, I'm on a plane to, go talk to Jimmy and Mr. Beast, and
Sorry about that. Yeah. Apologies. I really feel bad, but I had that opportunity. I did have to jump on it. But
Absolutely.
He said, the thing that was the hockey stick moment for him was when he was like, okay, I have just enough money coming in that I'm not doing anything else, right? I'm going to sleep in a crappy apartment and eat top ramen, whatever. And like, I wake up, I YouTube, I fall asleep. I wake up, I YouTube, I fall asleep. That's it. He didn't take holidays off. He did not take Christmas and Thanksgiving. His mom is begging him, like, will you please come over at least for Christmas morning? And he's like, I don't think I can, And so I think there's something that happens when you have that level of focus where you can just say, I'm going to wake up, I'm doing the thing, and I fall asleep.
Yeah. There was one episode on your podcast. I'm trying to remember who it was, but you mentioned obsession and energy. I remember that those were two of the elements that these successful people that you've been covering on your podcast, that they have in common across the board, which is they are obsessed and they seem to have a lot of energy And when you talk about Mr. Beast, that's exactly what it feels like, right? You just mentioned it right now. He's obsessed with one thing. He just wants to do this one thing over and over again. And the level of energy that he has, right, channeling through that thing, through that one thing, is just amazing. Because usually in the day to day, I look at my to do list today, right, and I have way more than one thing. So immediately in my mind, I'm like fragmenting that energy, and just by looking at the to-do list, I feel depleted. I'm not gonna lie, right? Rather than having one thing that you're really excited about and obsessed about and saying, I'm all in into that, which I feel for us, we've talked about it, is potentially just being on a podcast all day long, right? Like having to just record and talking to cool people all day.
Well, one of the things that I have found helpful to me, because obviously you have those to-dos, like just life comes up, right? And so it's just not realistic to do the thing you love every second of every day. I wish it was. But for me, I have, I found that the thing I love to do is actually not to podcast, it's to read. Like I love reading and studying these stories, right? And so I just decided basically from 8:30 to 10:30ish every day I read. And before I would put that on the back burner of like, no, I should really clear out the hardest things first and things I don't want to do and save the reading for later in the day. But no, it gives me energy. And so I can get through some of those other to-dos that I don't want to do faster. And it is the most important thing, right? Like, frankly, if I'm not studying the lives of these great people, the rest of the business empire, doesn't go. And so I have found that's the best thing to do. Put the most important thing, which should also be the thing that you love, first, and set aside a good chunk of time to do that before you start to move on to those other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's like a definitely like mind shift that happens to a lot of people. I mean, it certainly happened to me, for example, like, for the longest time, I think when we met you when we met you, Luca was like 2, now we have Mateo 2, and it's like, okay, well, family, all these things, and the business at the time, we didn't have the studio at the time. It was everything online. And it was like, I'm going to get done with like my to-do list or my items in the day, whether that's like recording the podcast or doing research or outbound, whatever it needs to be done first. And then I'm going to take care of myself. Right. And you hear all these amazing people and successful people are like, well, if you don't take care of yourself first, then none of this happens. And for some reason, like my mind or my head wasn't clicking. Right. And it wasn't until recently where it's like, you know what, I'm done. Like I was like massively overweight, like for my personal standard, right? Like we play soccer at a very high level, right? So in a sense, like we took a bunch of years of a break, but I wasn't feeling right. Like I wasn't thinking straight. Like I was tired all the time, like all these things, right? And I wasn't exercising. I wasn't moving like the way that I used to do. And then when I made that shift where it's like, okay, I enjoy maybe doing a workout, or I like, this is like my priority. Or when, like you said, like if it's fun for you, it's like making that decision to where like that is as important as anything else, if not more, right? Like our mental health and then our physical health, right? And for you, reading probably falls into like the mental health of like, okay, this is what I enjoy doing, and then hence I'm gonna be more productive. But people think like, at least I did, you divide like work and life or work and fun, right? Or fun. And then at the end of the day, you don't do the things that you like to do because you were doing something for somebody else, right? The second I shifted that, everything has changed massively, and there's still a long way to go. But it's like initially, it's like that initial mental change that you got to do. But like, for example, sleep is a big one for me, right? It's like, well, I need to understand that sleeping more is not wasting time. It's actually making me more effective the next day, for example. That's the one I'm currently battling, right? I stay up late. I sleep less. So I think on the mental
sleep
side,
is a huge deal, by the way. And you know what's interesting is one of the things that you find, this is so fascinating about great historical figures, is they all lie about their sleep. So if you take it at face value, you're like, oh, all these successful people never sleep. They never sleep. They're just workaholics,
machines.
energy, and then their private secretaries are all like, yeah, they take naps in the middle of the day. You know, they're like Margaret Thatcher is the famous one. Like Margaret Thatcher, prime minister of first woman prime minister of the United Kingdom, was famous for sleeping like 4 hours a night, and it's only recently that her secretary's been like, yeah, she would sleep every car ride. Anytime she like went from place to place, she was napping, and then she'd take a nap in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
And so it's just like, oh yeah, to perform at a high level, you just have to sleep well. Same with Napoleon. He's like, oh yeah, men only need 4 hours of sleep. It's like, well, actually, he would sleep for 4 hours, wake up, work a little bit, go back to sleep, and then he often napped in the middle of the day. And he was actually an incredibly efficient sleeper. Anyway, sleep matters so much. I've been coming around to that too.
Now I feel even better about my midday naps that I take here in the studio. Appreciate it, man.
Yesterday I was on a call on the other studio, and I'm like talking to this person, and I'm like, hey, Fonzie, like I ask a question and I hear nothing back. I'm like, maybe he's like out in the bathroom, whatnot. So I finish the call, and then I'm like, where is he at? Right? Because like we have one studio, and there's like the office like / lobby, and then another studio. Then I turn around and he's like laying down, just like sleeping, taking a nap. So you're in the right path, bro.
Yeah,
you're in the right path.
I can take naps in very unconventional places. It's definitely a talent out there. I'll be launching a course about how to take naps in the future.
I would take it. I need to learn.
Ben, I know we're getting close to the end here, but just tell me a little bit more about that relationship with Mr. Beast, right? You're on Twitter, on your podcast page, right? How to Take Over the World. The banner is literally somebody asking, I need a podcast, literally anything, what you recommend. And Mr. Beast recommended your podcast, right? And I think you just said you went to interview him. What is that relationship like about in there? What are you guys talking about? Can you give us the inside scoop?
Are you paying millions of dollars so he can give you a Twitter shout out?
No, he just DM'd me on Twitter one day, and I see the DM, and I'm like, this cannot be real, right? I'm sure it's Mr. Beast. But he just said, I like the podcast. Do you want to chat? And so we started chatting. And I don't want to like overplay the relationship, right?
Yeah.
We've hung out a couple times. We played basketball last summer.
That's awesome.
Played board games with him. Most incredible Settlers of Catan player I have ever seen. Like literally, he's got to be one of the best in the world. Incredible.
Wow.
He's incredible at board games. And then I asked him if I could do an interview with him, and so I went out last week. Was it last week?
Yeah, that's
and did an interview with him and hung out a little bit in North Carolina. But
that's cool.
He's as successful as he is, not by accident. Like he is that talented. He's that smart and that driven. And this is not a flash in the pan. I would not bet against him over the next 10 years. I think we're gonna see some pretty incredible stuff.
It's like on your latest episode of Genghis Khan, right? Like he goes in, it's like, hey, if you become part of our empire, right? It's okay. Like we'll treat you right. We'll elevate you. We'll give you all the facilities and stuff. But if you go against us, you'll be dead.
Yeah. One of the other things that reminded me of Genghis Khan, that reminded me of Mr. Beast, was I say in this last Genghis Khan episode that good leaders think about strategy and great leaders think about psychology. And that was something that was so interesting to me in playing board games with Mr. Beast. Was we're there playing Settlers of Catan. Everyone else is just thinking about strategy. And within 30 seconds of starting the game, he's like, hey, do you want to make an alliance? I want to attack you if you don't attack me. It's like, what? Can you even do that? Like, are you allowed to do that? And
you're like checking the instruction books and like,
Yeah, exactly. And he's very much thinking about like the psychology and like the other people and the personalities involved. You talk about Genghis Khan, don't go against me. It's funny. I was talking to one of his top guys that works in his company, and I was hearing about his background. I was like, wow, like you're a really talented creator. And he goes, yeah, that's what this company is. It's like Mr. Beast took 10, 15, 20 of the just most talented creators you could possibly imagine, and he has a big suction cup on our brains, and he's sucking out all the creativity and the intelligence and the good ideas, and it all goes into his business empire, and that's why it's so incredible. And that's right. It's just like 15, 20 amazing little Mr. Beast running around who all think exactly like he does.
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. Any special takeaway from those conversations with him that you really want to implement on your side of things?
Um, it's interesting. I gained 20 pounds last year of mostly muscle. I was trying to gain weight, and I wasn't doing anything too different from what I had been doing. I just started working out with this guy who is not a professional, but is like definitely a part-time amateur weightlifter. Like can deadlift 500 pounds, can bench press, 350, whatever. Just massive guy.
Easy stuff, right?
Yeah. And I was just like, oh, I'm not doing anything different, except I knew I should work out with intensity, but now I've experienced like, this is what intensity is like. This is how I should be lifting. And then once you're doing that, you're like, okay, now I know what to do going forward. Same thing. Like, does Mr. Beast do anything super different from what I already knew I should be doing? No, but you just hang out with him and you're like, wow, this is what intensity is like. Right? Like
you see the bar move up, right? And you're like,
yeah.
That now I know what I didn't know.
Exactly. And like I already knew focus and intensity are keys. But then you're with him and you're like, oh, okay, this is what focus and intensity are. Yeah, exactly. This is what it's actually like.
Yeah, I think we've on our side, like for example, we're having conversations internally with our team, like how to grow the team, or like how to find the better talent, or like, are we having the people in the right places? And we work with these companies that have amazing operators or people. So we've seen like what can be possible, right, for other bigger companies. And the same thing, it's like, well, that's the reference now, right? How can we get something that, but Ben, today has been awesome catching up. Hopefully we can get you, let's not wait 2 years to do this again.
Sorry I have to run early on you guys.
No problem.
I'm just going to put it right here for next one. I would love to talk about Pot Ramp, right? And what you guys are doing in there, kind of like those initiatives that you guys are doing. Looks very interesting. Very, very interesting. So let's do that. Hopefully sooner than later.
I'll send you a DM next to Jimmy, just give me their favorite next to him and we're good. And then send me a screenshot so I can leverage the heck out of that. No, I'm kidding. But Ben, it's always a pleasure, man. You have two brothers here. With that said, thank you so much for tuning into the Content Profit Podcast. Go ahead and follow the show in your favorite podcasting platform and on social media at These Bros Co.
That is Ryan and Ben here, helping you move one step closer towards your goal. Please don't forget to share this episode and leave a 5-star review and go show Ben that podcast some love is awesome.
Oh yeah.
See ya.
Bye guys.